This is a video on Richard Green's relation to ideas throughout his life course. Sounds really boring, but it corresponds to what many of you have gone through, and I've articulated it for me, so the articulation may apply to you and give you some focus and power that you didn't have before watching the video. Let's see. My father created 3 small new businesses. All of them were mini steel mills. That is, steel mills that made new steel, but by taking old steel products and melting them down and using that scrap to make new steel. At the time, 45, 50 years ago, when he was doing this, not a lot of people were doing it, and eventually some very smart people at Chaparral Steel grew to huge size, very successful doing it. My father did not grow to huge size. He never got the formula to make this business huge, right? But I watched him as a kid struggle to make payroll. And I watched him as a kid totally shift into a very sweet, charming person whenever he talked to customers on the phone. And I watched him tell us kids that he was sacrificing by working so hard for us, but he really got a lot of joy from running and trying to grow his businesses. And it was not as much a sacrifice to leave us as it appeared. It was the game of having a chance to make a big hit in the world, a chance for luck. You try companies and that didn't work. You try a different kind of company and that didn't work. You try a different kind of company, that didn't work. You know, he's the kind of guy that if he hadn't gotten sick, maybe he could have done a Ray Kroc at age 52, where his 4th or 5th try might have gotten lucky. But I watched that, and it gave me an idea about my role in life and the role of ideas in life. Occasionally, problems in my father's small companies, as each one gradually failed, sometimes were magically solved by a single idea, usually from other people or from a conversation. And he would just do the idea, and bingo, it worked. And he was as amazed as anybody that that idea worked so well and had so much power. Then there were other problems that he threw everything he had at them, the kitchen sink and every idea from every friend and every idea he had. And these problems seemed impermeable to any ideas. So I saw both things. I saw situations where the ideas just bounce off and don't work, and then I saw situations where really slight, particular configurations of ideas thrown into a situation totally transform it. So that gave me an image that ideas could have power. Then I met a lot of different cultures growing up, and I met people from a lot of different professions and parts of the country and nations, and they had power to read my situations that I didn't have, because they had ideas available I didn't have and experiences available I didn't have. And I noticed that they had power over my situations because they were just different. And later, as I got older, I noticed sometimes I had power over their situations just because I could look at them in ways they had never and would never naturally look at them from their context. So I learned about the power of difference to increase the chance for being lucky with your ideas. And then I learned that having ideas is tricky because when you apply them, they can fail for 2 entirely different reasons. They can fail because you never fully implemented your own idea. And that's the majority of the time. Just weak implementation or unfocused implementation or insincere, overly busy implementation. Too much else going on. Distracted implementation. Or they could fail because the idea just genuinely was wrong, didn't fit the situation. And that you had to have data on how well you implemented, and data on the impact of your idea, so that you could figure out whether it was an idea that worked or if it needed to be changed in a certain direction. And if you depended on your impressions of victory, you almost always were deluded, because you love your own idea so much and you want your efforts to succeed, and you're looking for any way to interpret the outcome changes as good so that you can praise yourself and your idea and feel satisfied. And so you really need some objective data that just stubbornly doesn't go up when you want it to go up. And it says that as nice as it was to do this, as much fun as it felt to apply it, it didn't impact the situation at all, and it doesn't work. So I learned that you got to gather data on those two things: the actual impact of beyond your subjectivity, and how well you implemented your idea, in order to be able to distinguish which of those two failure modes you're suffering from. And then I have alternated between the world of building ideas and the world of applying ideas. And I never looked, I had this idea very early that my generation would live 20 years longer than my father's generation. And so all the phase gates in life were 20 years too early. And so people graduated from college at 22, so I would graduate from college at 42, one generation later. People would get their first serious job at 23. I would get my first serious job at 43. And I actually lived my life that way. And therefore, every job, everything I did up until 43 was just playing, trying to stretch boundaries, shake the world up, see if things worked or didn't work, doing ridiculously extreme things on the job. It looked courageous to other people, but in my case, it didn't take much courage because I never planned to have a career at Xerox. I never planned to have a career at EDS. I never planned to have a career at Cooper's and Library. I never planned to have a career at NV Phillips. I never planned to have a career at Thomson Electric. I never planned to have a career at Matsushita Electric. I never planned to have a career at Sekisui. Again and again and again, bosses and managers and later executives came up to me asking me to tone down my ideas or my behavior to conform so that my career would be better. And I ignored them completely and got more extreme because I had experiments to run. I was trying to learn what works, what doesn't work, and how far you could go with an idea and how far you couldn't go. And the only way to do that was to fail, to push things until the system broke down. Later I met Genichi Taguchi, who was defeating Americans all over the world with his approach to optimizing designs through experiments. And he had a principle that you wanted to experiment with a subsystem in a design until it broke. You wanted to push it to its limit because you learned more when you did that. And too many people say that this equipment's expensive, we don't want to break it, so we'll test it within limits that don't break it, and they just didn't learn much that way. And so it was nice, years later from Genichi Taguchi's mouth in Japanese to actually get confirmation of my approach of jobs. And so up until 43, I had absolutely no intention to have a career in any of these places. I was simply there to learn. And therefore I looked courageous because I did things that you're not supposed to do, and I didn't support the opinions around me, and I didn't kiss up to most of the bosses, although I always addressed my initiatives in whatever direction the CEO said we needed to move in. So I was not apolitical, but I was, how do I say, not kissy-uppy political. I was strategically political, not kissy-uppy political. And I never attempted to get promoted. One or two promotions. I got typically promoted 5 levels or 7 levels of management a year. At Xerox, I think started at level 6, and 2 years later I was at level 20 out of 21 levels at Xerox. So virtually a technical vice president after 2.5 years of work. And I didn't try for that. That was a side effect of being bold. And generally I just tried to find the biggest problem of the organization and solve it myself since nobody else was solving it. It's not hard. But I found out that my ideas worked. I developed a lot of interesting thoughts at Santa Fe Institute at the University of Michigan in 3 degrees, and in Japan before that, and at an NGO before that. But I didn't really test them in the jungle of world business and the top-level global companies of the U.S. and Europe and Japan. And so it was really nice to go to these top-level companies and meet the CEO every year, have him throw new buildings, new headcount, new budget at me, take me to meet the biggest customers, the chairman of American Express, the chairman of IBM, etc., to do a demo for them. It was really a surprise and heartening that ideas really work. They have power. And even people who don't respect ideas and don't read the right books and don't like me because I have ideas, they respected the results I got with them. And then I looked at, since ideas really do work, then I said, I need to improve my machinery for dealing and generating and applying ideas. And so I got a little serious about making sure I read 3 books every day, which I've been doing now for 40 years, and making sure that I actually diagram the main points from the 3 best chapters of each of those books. And then making sure that I write 3,000 to 4,000 pages a year of new books. And, if every idea you read, is going to turn out into something you publish, it gives you a great motivation to improve the quality of your inputs. If you input zillions and zillions of ideas and they don't go into any particular output form, then it's discouraging. I mean, when your brain goes, they go. But when my brain goes, if I die tonight or tomorrow morning, my brain goes, I've got 50,000 pages that express me better than I could do face to face now, because those books remember thought patterns and insights that I've forgotten, that I can't index and go back and get in my brain. Alternating between the world of idea generation and the world of applying is very healthy, because business becomes utterly stupid very, very rapidly, and the people in business develop such low standards of thought and activity, especially big businesses. Doing anything new is such a hassle and is so slow that you just keep lowering your standards of what a deed is, making it smaller and smaller so you can still report that you did stuff. And everybody knows this. So, do you need to make numbers to be promoted? Well, anybody can make numbers by scarfing resources needed for the future and throwing them all into some number 3 months from now that the CEO and the stupid stockholders will like. Now, fortunately, in Europe and Japan, people are not that stupid, but Americans are that stupid, and they've committed the economic suicide. They don't realize it because they created a medical system and a pension system based on 3% growth a year, which they're never going to have in the next 50 years. So they are bankrupt, and they just don't realize it. Plus, they lost $13 trillion in 2008, stolen by Harvard grads for cocaine treatment programs for the Harvard grad kids. Then I applied ideas in Japan, Europe, and the US, and in NGOs and for-profits, and in academia and in business. And that variety of landscape of application is really quite important. You don't know what an idea is until you throw it against a completely different part of the world, a completely different way of looking at the world, completely different constraints, and then find in some totally new form that same idea has power. And you get all this stuff from the world. Oh, in Japan, you have to do things the Japanese way, or in Europe, we have a slower way of doing things, and oh, we Americans, we need profits every 3 months. And you can ignore what the Americans said. They don't need profits every 3 months. It's never true. It's a religion they believe, but it's not true. And the Europeans have this religion of ponderous slowness. It's not true. And the Japanese have this religion of, we hate foreigner ways, so we're going to tell you that all foreigner ways don't work because we were defeated in a war and we're a warlike samurai culture, and we're still embarrassed about that. And you can ignore that. It's just defensiveness about how their asses got beat in the war because they had all this great spirit, and spirit got its ass whipped by manufacturing might. So you can ignore a lot of those differences. Now, you can't ignore them all. And that's the tricky part. Some of the differences you can completely ignore, especially when people are using their culture to tell a lie to themselves and to you. But others of their features you really have to pay attention to, because they have great power and they're not being forced on you as a lie. It's really a constraint in the unconscious patterns of behavior of people that they don't have access to and they can't change consciously. So you have to really distinguish the parts of a culture that can consciously be changed, that people have access to, and the parts that they don't have access to. All of culture is just heavily practiced routines. But some heavily practiced routines people are aware of and can consciously adapt and modify and mitigate, redirect. But other unconsciously mastered routines, they don't have access to, they're not aware of, and they can't stop them operating because they don't remember practicing them. They learn them unconsciously. They never articulated them before. You have to learn how to distinguish that, and it does take some experience of translating ideas into totally different contexts to find out where that boundary is in different cultures and in you.